if you have parents and students who believe in the ideologies of Marx and Nietzsche, and they're spouting off in public school all the time, and they're in parent teacher conferences all the time, and they're in school board meetings all the time, guess what? You're not going to have a free country anymore. You're not going to have a free school system anymore. You're not going to have good values and good cardinal virtues being taught in your schools anymore. It's just not going to happen. It's going to be severely challenged on all angles. And that's what we're seeing here in America. We're seeing that happen. We're seeing this happen in real time. And it's getting worse and worse. The last 5 years have been just absolutely astonishing. And I can't even believe how much our school systems have deteriorated. Hello, welcome to the Phillip Mason Show, where we free our minds from ignorance, anxiety, and the overwhelm of too much information, transforming ourselves into people of virtue, intelligence, and wisdom. Welcome, my friend. I'm so glad you're here. Let's talk about education today. We're going to talk today a little bit about why the public school systems here in America are rotting. They're falling apart. So I'm going to cover three key areas in which we're experiencing this here in America on a very general and broad scale across the whole United States, where our school systems are deteriorating. So I'm going to break this down for you today and kind of talk through some things. Education in America is a very sensitive topic right now, and so I want to communicate in a way that's very positive, but also communicates the great challenges that we're up against, and to do it accurately. Um, so as I dive into this, I just hope and I pray that I can communicate well my point and be able to share it in a way that it makes sense and that um, it can be understood. So the first thing that I want to talk about today, um, what the big number one reason why I see education failing in America today. Now, there's many reasons why our education systems are struggling, but this is the number one reason why I see that education is struggling here in America. And that is that we no longer read from the best books, the great national books here in America. We don't study them anymore. The school systems don't study it. If the upcoming generation doesn't know what to study, and they don't know how to study, and they don't know why they study what they study, they're lost, and they can be fed anything, and they can study anything, and they can assume that that's the new standard. When in reality, that's not where they came from. That's not how they got there. And that's not how their nation was built. And that's not how their family was built. And their family legacy was not built that way. So it becomes very important to read and understand those great books that have built America and have created it into what it actually is today, in terms of its success over time. So those great books, they develop one of the key things that they develop within us as we study them and learn from them is virtue. And we as humans, we need virtue in our lives. As we develop virtue in our lives, we become better and better, and we become more excellent. We become more perfect in who we are, and we learn how to be better parents. We learn how to build better families. We learn how to build better churches, to have greater faith in God. We learn the importance of freedom, and we recognize liberties when they stand before us, liberties that we have um, that are not only sacred, but they're self-evident. Um, we appreciate the power of marriage and why marriage is so important, and why raising children is so critical to upcoming generation. There's so many other things. You can go down the list. Owning property, learning to write well, to speak well, to express well is all very critical, very important. Learning how to serve in the community and to be cohesive as a whole, and towards preserving those freedoms and liberties is really important. And also, just nation building in and of itself, being able to establish a nation that operates on principles of freedom, that has good government structures, understanding what good government structure is and how it functions is really important for a rising generation of leaders and of statesmen, stateswomen. And without those great books, you're not going to get there. That type of virtue, those types of skills, those types of quality of life, and those types of aspirations just won't materialize without that type of education, without that type of personal growth that comes from making a serious study of the great national books. So, what are some of those great books that I'm talking about? Well, there's a long list, and many of them don't even come from our country. They come from Western civilization, but many of them do come from our country, and many are just extremely vital to the United States. So, I'm talking about the Bible. I'm talking about the U.S. Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. We can look at the Federalist Papers. A lot of the early Americans read and understood the Federalist Papers very well. A lot of us today don't have a clue what's in them. We haven't read them. We haven't studied. The schools don't teach them. Thomas Paine's Common Sense is a big one. John Locke's Two Treatises of Government. Montesquieu's The Spirit of Laws. These are a few examples of great works, great writings, and great books that America uh, relies upon. They're foundational to her success, to her growth, and without them, you just don't have much. It all kind of collapses and falls in on itself. These are the building principles, building doctrines, and virtues of our country. Without them, what we've become today as a nation would not have materialized without those great books, without those great principles and doctrines. Okay, so that's the first thing that's most concerning to me is we're not teaching the right things in our school. We're not teaching the great books anymore. Let's move on to number 2. So the second one here, virtue learning, this idea of when you go to school, you not only learn skills and subjects and topics, but you also learn virtues to help you as a human being grow up to the proper stature, the full stature of what you're capable of becoming. Which, if you're a religious person, that is to become more like God, to become godlike. Now, in our schools, we have a big movement away from religion and from faith, and we do believe in a separation of church and state. Um, but in our education was really meant to be private, and people in a private setting can search out the things of the soul, and they can become more virtuous in their efforts. They can have that desire welling up within them to become great citizens, great disciples of Jesus Christ or of their God. And they can develop into wonderful people who serve, who love, who lift, who inspire. And that's really the power of having a virtuous person, someone that will be successful in life because they have those virtues instilled inside of them. Now, there's a lot of political forces. There's many of which want to remain secret. There's pop culture. There's a lot of legalities. There's the court systems, and there's the government itself, including the courts, who have done a lot to kind of constrict or restrain or to separate um, virtue learning out of the schools. And so academia no longer requires or no longer bothers to even teach virtues in the school. But when they do, it's a very calculated, it's a very specific type of virtue learning. And virtue learning is probably not even the right term. There's really what's being taught now in the public school system is a very specific, very calibrated, watered down approach to values and to lesser virtues. So, for example, what built America is the great classic virtues that have built the strong families of America, that have built the strong government of America, that have built the strong economic and business-minded values of America, and have allowed America to prosper like no other country on earth has ever prospered. So, what are those virtues? Well, let's name some of them here. I've got a list, so let's go through it. So, um, some of the most important top tier and primary virtues that should be taught in schools are wisdom or prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance, patience, faith, hope, and charity. Oftentimes, these get kicked to the curb in our modern school systems, and they get replaced with lesser virtues or watered down virtues or with slogans or with whatever value the school comes up that they think is important. And so, what are some of those watered down virtues or values? Well, there's a long list, but I'll just name a few here to keep things short. So, it's expressed in words like excellence, inclusion, niceness, kindness, safety, responsibility, lifelong learning, creativity, and global awareness. So those are just to name a few. There's many more that we could go through. Now, there's nothing bad if you look individually at these values or these virtues. There's nothing there's nothing wrong with them. In fact, you look at them individually, they're good, right? If you look, for example, if you look at the word inclusive, which is a very popular word in the last couple decades, and becoming increasingly popular, and we hear it more and more politically. Being inclusive is a good thing, right? It can be a very good thing. When we want to help people feel involved in the community, we want people to help feel involved in our church. We want to help people in our family feel involved, right? If we're in the workplace, we want people to feel like they're part of a team. That's a good thing, right? Now, if you look at others, like safety, right? Is safety good? Well, yeah, of course it's good, right? You need safety in the workplace, right? No one wants to get injured. No one wants to get verbally assaulted. There can be a safety there. Um, you know, Safety can come in a lot of different forms. We want our country to be safe. We don't want it to be attacked by other countries. We don't want to have terrorism, um, either foreign or domestic, right? So safety can be a very good thing, right? In our schools specifically, we don't want bullies, right? We don't want other kids picking on other kids, right? It affects their safety, right? So that's a very important thing, right? And we could do this. We could look at other words too, like creativity is a really good word, right? Children have imaginations, and we want them to be creative, right? Um, and global awareness, as a school value, that's kind of an interesting one. Do we want our students to be aware, geographically of what's happening around the globe? Yeah, of course we do. That's really important. And to have an awareness of global events, that's really critical, actually. So, so why is this bad? Why is this shift away from these primary core classic virtues that's built the great nations of the earth and has built this great nation of America, arguably the greatest nation on the face of the planet, throughout time? And why is it such a bad thing that they're replaced with these lesser, watered down values or virtues, um, which individually by themselves are very good? So follow me really closely here, and I'll endeavor to explain why this is an issue, why this is a problem, and why things aren't always what they seem to be. So the great books, the classics, there are two great books, two classics. Um, and these authors have written other books as well too it could be added in there. But there's two philosophers, Karl Marx, and then also Friedrich Nietzsche, both of German European origins. And they've written some great books, and they're very gifted, very talented individuals. So, Beyond Good and Evil was written by Friedrich Nietzsche and contains his philosophy. And the Communist Manifesto, written by Marx and also by Engels, um, kind of outlays the marching orders for communism and the platform for communism. So these two great seminal works, by Nietzsche and by Karl Marx, they're very powerful, and they've shaped how humans in America, the people in America, view their government. They view themselves and view history, and they've been highly influenced by this. Now, like I said before, there are many political forces, many of which are and have been secret. And it's kind of interesting. Karl Marx himself, one of his purposes in writing the Communist Manifesto was to say, hey, guess what? We are no longer secret. We're not hiding in a closet anymore. We're coming out and telling the world what our bold, audacious plan is, what our new hope for the world is, what our supposed utopias we want it to be. And so he's going to explain how we get there as a party. That's what Karl Marx is doing. Uh, Nietzsche has a little bit different philosophy, but he's very similar to Marx in a lot of regards. He also is looking for this higher morality. In fact, he kicks out what we call morality. He kicks out good and evil, right? He just throws it out the door. Um, he throws the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. And he says, you know what? Good and evil, it's just kind of an inconvenience, and it kind of stifles us, and it's old fashioned, and we're just going to throw good and evil out, and we're just going to do whatever feels right, and we're just going to remove consequences, and if we all come together, a big global awareness and a big global unified government, we'll be able to make our own laws, and we can make it whatever we want. People can do whatever they want, and it'll be fantastic. And that's kind of the overall marching message that we get from Marx and from Nietzsche. Now, they go about in a little bit different ways, but they're very similar. There's a lot of similarities between Marx and Nietzsche. They do conflict, though, in very key areas. But it's these two philosophers, it's these two leaders, these ideologists. It's their ideas that have been swirling around in European thought, which European thought has influenced American thought, and American thought has been cultivated over um, many decades, even centuries, to where we're at the point now, after our U.S. Constitution here, we're approaching, 250 years, and after our Declaration of Independence, where we've been around long enough where these ideas from these philosophers and from these party leaders have become so ingrained in our society that we don't even realize how much they are part of our lives. And that's because our education system is failing us. We don't read these books anymore. We don't read what Karl Marx wrote. We don't read what Nietzsche wrote. We don't read Beyond Good and Evil. We don't read the Communist Manifesto in public schools. Now, I know some of you are saying, why would you want to read those awful books in school? They're evil. And I totally agree with you. They are evil, absolutely. In fact, they're what we call twisted classics or decrepit classics, meaning, um, or sometimes we say perverted classics. They're they're not classics in the good sense, but they're classics in the bad sense. But they're written so powerfully, and the ideas are so powerful in them, and that their works have had such a huge influence on people that you can't ignore them. You can't throw them out. And you have to read them to be able to understand why people do bad things. You have to read them to understand why political systems devolve from high and wonderful and freedom-loving republics down to terrorizing democracies that are one step away from tyranny. You have to read, you have to read Marx, and you have to read Nietzsche to be able to understand American political dynamics at this time in American history. You just have to, and we're not doing that in our public school systems. Just flat out, we're not doing it. And we need these great books. We need to read these great books. Nietzsche, he is a powerful writer. I mean, the guy's prose is absolutely beautiful. It's stunning. He is so convincing. He's so convincing that people can be blindsided by these new truths that he brings in that just totally scrape away morality. They scrape away these very time-honored virtues that we've been honoring for thousands of years throughout world history that have built great nations, like the Greeks and the Romans, and like England, and even France and Germany, and other great nations, especially the United States. And so, all of these nations have their problems, but they came to power and they came to greatness because you had a core group of men and women who followed these time-honored virtues, and they were the standard. And guess what? They still are the standard, but as a nation, we're forgetting that. And it's all tied back to, we have an education system, we have a political system that has infused the doctrines, the teachings of Nietzsche and Karl Marx into our society, into our classrooms, into our political arena, into our political elections. And so it puts us in a really bad spot. So I need kind of a little bit of a paradigm shift, and I hope you see where I'm coming from on this. What we're teaching and how we're teaching in the school system has come about because of these philosophers in Europe many, many years ago. And now it's bearing fruit in our nation. We're living by it, but we've become so ignorant in our school system that most parents, most grandparents even, and certainly students today don't know what's in these books, and they haven't studied it, but yet they believe it and they do it and they practice it. And and so if you have parents and students who believe in the ideologies of Marx and Nietzsche, and they're spouting off in public school all the time, and they're in parent teacher conferences all the time, and they're in school board meetings all the time, guess what? You're not going to have a free country anymore. You're not going to have a free school system anymore. You're not going to have good values and good cardinal virtues being taught in your schools anymore. It's just not going to happen. It's going to be severely challenged on all angles. And that's what we're seeing here in America. We're seeing that happened. We're seeing this happen in real time, and it's getting worse and worse. The last 5 years have been just absolutely astonishing, and I can't even believe how much our school systems have deteriorated. Now, I do want to say that there are great teachers out there, and there are great schools out there, and there are great students out there, and they are gaining an education. But generally, we're talking about the whole of our system has deteriorated, is rotting very terribly. And so, virtue virtue learning in American school systems is being hogtied by pop culture, by legalities, by political forces, by our government itself, and it's very difficult for real virtue to be taught in the school systems anymore. Students just don't know how to act. They don't know how to behave, and they don't have good examples placed before them. They're just told to be nice, be kind, and that's because the people who are in charge really want them to fall into the line and to believe and to follow political systems like the kind that Marx and Nietzsche wanted. End of story. That's what's happening. Okay, so that's number two. Let's move on to number three here. So this next one might surprise some of you, and some of you will say, yeah, of course, this makes total sense. So the third reason why our public schools are having such a difficult time today is they have too much money. Too much money. Now, oftentimes what we hear is that they don't have enough money. Now, that's true in certain cases. I won't dispute that for sure. There are certainly school systems, and I live in a state where there are schools that really struggle to have enough financially. Just to be able to have a classroom, just to be able to have books, just to have a teacher and students be able to show up in a simple classroom and have some learning take place. There's no doubt that that happens in America. But most of our school systems in America are overfunded, and oftentimes that money does not go to learning activities. It does not go to teachers. It does not go to helping students learn more. It does not go towards books. Um, and so I'm going to give you just two examples of what I'm talking about. There literally is a very long list of money wasted in our school system, and it hurts student learning when we spend too much money on education. Really, at its heart, education is super simple. It's super powerful when you just boil it down to the very simplest ingredients, which is you have a student, you have a book, you have a discussion with other classmates and with the teacher, and then you write about it. You write about what you read, what you discussed, and you rinse and repeat. You go through that process again. Learning at its most fundamental element, that's what it comprises. Now, there can be a lot of other things you can do and foster great learning. And I'm not discounting those by saying these are the basics, right? But what I am saying is that these are fundamental, and we have to have these for great learning to take place. And most of our money should go towards those activities, learning in the classroom. And that's not what's happening. So I'm going to give you two examples of where that's not happening, where I see a lot of waste. The first one is with testing. Testing, so much money is wasted on testing. The feds throw so much money at the states, throw a lot of money at it. Even local governments throw a lot of money at it. School boards throw a lot of money at it. Um, Private individuals with a lot of money throw throw a lot of money at testing. I won't name any names, but you probably know who I'm talking about. There's there's a there's a list of very wealthy individuals who love to throw money at testing, and they call it helping education. And I I beg to differ on that. So now testing, I'm not discounting testing. Having assessments and assessing learning uh, progress among students can be very helpful, can be very beneficial for the student, for the teacher, for the parent involved, and it can be extremely helpful. But the key here is that it's done on a local level. It's done between the student and the teacher, or between the parent and the student. And to be able, or sometimes the student just needs to assess themselves. Sometimes it can be between students, or just the student testing himself. And that is sufficient. That's the way it should be. Now, I can understand where a nation or a state wants to understand where their students are at so that they can help improve. That makes sense. And, a state has the right, if they want to test their students, they can certainly do that. That's legal under the U.S. Constitution, and it's legal under their state constitution. Is it the best use of their money? In my opinion, no, it's not. Can it provide some helpful information for politicians? Yeah, sure, it can. Absolutely. Um, should the federal government be throwing a lot of money at testing? No. In fact, the federal government doesn't really have any right to be in education at all. Um, the founding fathers, you look at what they discussed, what they put together, you look at how the US Constitution is formed, that's really a state right. The right to govern education belongs to the states. Now, there are times when the federal government can intervene in certain cases. And so, a very classic example of this now today was the civil rights movement, when the federal government the courts determined that there couldn't be segregation in schools between blacks and whites, and so the federal government stepped in and ensured that that happened. So, the federal government has the right to do that under a circumstance like that. Um, but typically, the federal government should stay out of education. They should have very little to do with it. There are exceptions to that, of course. One of them may be, that the federal government has responsibility for the Navy and for the Army. They have the right to set up schools to educate those that are serving in the Army and the Navy and so forth. And that's within their prerogative, and they have the total right to do that. But generally, schools across the whole United States, those are individual states. They have the right to determine if they want to have public schools. Typically, most of the founding fathers were in favor of private education and people educating themselves at home. That's what most of them were in favor of. There was a few that favored general, basic um, learning and tutoring for the masses, for the general people who were uh, financially poor. Thomas Jefferson was one of those that thought it would be a really good idea to help a lot of a lot of the citizens of America who were poor, were in needed help getting a basic education. It was very difficult to afford books, and so he thought there was some provision where the government can step in and just help at a very just basic standard level. Now, in our society today, we've gone way beyond what Thomas Jefferson envisioned and what other founding fathers envisioned. And in some ways, that's probably good. In other ways, been very bad. Has not been productive. Now, with testing, we're really, when you have all these layers of government that want all these tests, and students, we're just testing them to death, and we're teaching them to salivate over tests, and we're motivating the wrong behaviors in our students, where students, their academic performance is based on how they answer a question on a test, and teachers they're oftentimes evaluated on how their students do on those tests. And so the focus of the teacher becomes on how do I get that student to put the right answer in that computer on that computer screen in that particular box. And so it becomes hyper focused on this testing process. And that's really not the way learning should be. Learning should be this happy, exploratory discovery process where students can ask deep questions and explore wonderful topics and have great discussions and not have this troubling burden hanging over them of testing. I got to get through the next test so I can survive, so I can get to high school or I can get to college, so I can have a job, so I can have a family, so I can have a life, and so I can have money, and it just becomes this huge burden for students, and they stop learning and they start worrying more and more about these tests. And it's not good, it's not healthy. And on top of that, we're wasting so much money on testing. We have huge bureaucracies that serve testing, huge companies that get incredible amounts of money for all these testing systems, all these testing software, all this testing metrics and um, big data that comes out so that you have all these metrics on all these students, which I get it. Some of that's helpful, but it's a huge waste of money and it doesn't help the students learn at all. And so we have to just recognize that. Okay, so I'm going to give you one more example on this of too much, this example of too much money and how it's wasted. So we talked about testing is a big waste of money in our public school system. Another example I'm going to give to you is buildings. So real estate and buildings. We waste tons of money, millions and millions of dollars go down the tube every year on building projects. And there's different reasons for that, and I'm not going to go into detail on why this is the case. And there's a lot of localized, individualized situations that we could explore, and there certainly can be some corruption in there too. But I just want to look at one aspect of it. So I'm going to give you one example. So I had in one of the businesses I owned, I had a customer. He was in the construction industry, and his whole career, he built schools. He built schools across the state that I live in. And he did this for many decades. And I was talking to him about this, and I said, "What do you think about the schools that are being built today?" And he just looks at me and he says, "Well, the schools that we build today are absolute castles. They're monsters. They're huge, big, gorgeous, beautiful buildings." And he says, "The buildings that we built back then were very modest, um, very simple structures. They were very sufficient, but they were very simple, just very functional. The schools that we build today, they're very elaborate and they're gorgeous and they have tons of amenities and tons of luxuries and they're just extremely nice." And I'm just totally blown away by what we're building today. So we spend millions of dollars above and beyond what schools used to be. Now, perhaps some of that's good, and perhaps we do more today than we did back then, and we need some more accommodation for that, and perhaps that's fine. But when you have middle schools and you have high schools that's starting to look like college campuses with huge endowments, that's a problem. That's a lot of public taxpayer money that's being used on big fancy schools. And granted, maybe that's what taxpayers want. But when you consider that some students don't even have books to read, especially great books, and you consider that so many teachers are turning over, and so many teachers don't even have a decent salary, perhaps maybe we could have a little respect for teachers and take some of that money from testing, take some of that money from these massive over the top building projects and give that back to our teachers who are slaving away, working hard, dealing with all the garbage of the system, and be able to reward them a little bit for sticking around and helping our students and loving our students and presenting the topics in interesting and fascinating ways. And that way, perhaps maybe we can have some great teachers and they can actually enjoy showing up to work other than just for their love for the students, which is awesome. But they got to get paid for what they do too. So that's a thought I'd share with you. Okay, so those are two examples on how we have too much money in our school system. That's our third reason. So just to recap here, so it's all kind of crystal clear, hopefully. Um, First of all, so our first reason, we talked about schools no longer study the best books. And because they do that, they don't have a lot of those human skills, a lot of those cardinal virtues that are so critical to our society, to us as human beings, are not being taught. And great national books, such as the U.S. Constitution, the Federalist Papers, there's many of them. The Bible was so foundational to the growth of the United States of America. It's what gave the motivation to the founding fathers to start our country in the first place. Man, and look what they wrought. Look what they accomplished. Look what we enjoy today. We stand on the shoulders of giants. So much that we enjoy today because they took seriously those great books and they knew them inside and out. They read them, they quoted from them, and they even canonized them in different ways in our American literature and in some of our great national books. A lot of the principles and doctrines from the Bible into a lot of our great documents. Okay, so number two, that's number one. Schools no longer study the best books. Number two, virtue learning is non existent anymore. So this is connected to number one, of course, but really we have a lot of secret combinations. We have secret political groups. We have, in some cases, unions, pop culture. We have the court systems that are making it very difficult for the good core and cardinal virtues to be taught in the public school systems anymore. And it's being replaced with other ideologies, other values. Particularly, we talked about Nietzsche and also Karl Marx. Those are really the principles, the doctrines, the philosophies, the ideologies that are being taught in the public schools now. And the fascinating thing about it is everyone acts like this and believes like this, and they spout off this doctrine, this principle, but they don't know where it originates from. They don't know who they got it from. But it's been going around for so many years now, and it's been taught so much in our public school systems. Everyone thinks it's the gospel truth. It's the rock solid natural law, but it's not. This is just some philosophers coming up with how they want to make the world better. And they bring up some great points and they make some strong arguments, but at the end of the day, it's false. It's not true. And it's not moral. And it's not what builds human beings. And it's not what allows us to be successful and happy as a society, to promote freedom, to promote families, to promote marriage, to promote a successful, stable government structure, such as we have here in America, where we have a republic. We have a constitutional republic. And it takes a moral people with moral fiber who understand the difference between right and wrong to uphold such a constitutional republic. The founding fathers are very clear on that. You can't have a poorly educated people who don't have virtue in their lives and expect this government to withstand the test of time. Just not going to happen. It's just not. When you build your government and your government ideologies and your political elections off of Nietzsche and off of Marx, you're going to have problems. You're going to have riots. You're going to have contentions. You're going to have secret combinations doing evil things behind closed doors. You're going to have all sorts of issues and problems in government. And the list is just going to go on and on. You could all give me a million reasons, I'm sure. Okay, so that's number two. And then number three, we waste too much money. We spend too much money. There's just too much money in education, generally speaking, across the board. And we waste it on things like testing and on very, very expensive, very elaborate building projects, building massive schools that are in many regards, overbuilt. And, I love sports. I really do. And I grew up with sports and I played a lot of sports. But man, some of these stadiums that we're building and some of these sports facilities that we're building, man, just the money poured in those just pales in comparison to the money spent on books and on learning in the classroom and on teachers. It really does. Okay, so those are the three, and that concludes our our session together today, our episode. And I've just really enjoyed talking about these things with you. And I appreciate you being here with me today, friend, and allowing me to kind of share these thoughts and just kind of make them concrete. And I hope that I've been clear, and I hope that something that I've said today really resonates with you. And I would really encourage you to discuss what I've shared here with your family, with, maybe it's your child's teacher, maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's your school board. Um, and write down some ideas that you have, and think about them and discuss them and ponder them, and think about what you can do to help improve our education system in America. It really takes all of us together to reverse the rot that's in our public school systems. We need to build fresh. We need to build new. We can't fix what's already been destroyed, what already is rotten. It has to be replaced. We have to build from scratch. The homeschooling movement is a very important movement. The classical school movement, the charter school movement, um, is doing a phenomenal. All those movements are doing a phenomenal job right now, rebuilding our school systems in America and our education processes in America. And my hat off to all of them. And it's been my pleasure to be a part of several of them. And it's been a real joy. So thank you for joining me today, my friend. That is all for now. And I look forward to spending time with you in our next episode.